we have the following organizations and individuals who will be making presentations: COSATU, CRL, Professor Du Plessis, Deaf South Africa, and Mr. Mlungi Sizwane. Those are the organizations and individuals who will be making presentations to these public hearings of today. We will start with COSATU. You have 20 minutes, after which members will be given an opportunity to ask questions or make comments on the presentation that would have been made. Is COSATU ready?
Sorry, Chair. Apologies. Did you note apologies? I would need to leave early, so I just give my apology in anticipation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other apology? We have noted also the apology of Honorable Engelbrecht, who is attending to some urgent matters today. Honorable Yago. Honorable Yago.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to raise that I'm on the road and there might just be network problems, but I'm also in the meeting then I'll start the duration of the meeting.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I see no other apologies. Can we proceed? COSATU.
Okay. Good morning, Chair. Yes, good morning to members. We can jump straight to it. I think, yeah, Chair, it's always good to be with members of this committee. We've always done, I think, excellent work on many issues. Just give me 1 second, Chair. Okay, it should, yeah, the presentation should be here, Chairperson.
Yes.
So I think, okay, no, thank you, Chair. So I think, Chair, this is a relatively straightforward and I think a relatively progressive amendment bill. But I think as COSATU, we would want to say that we support many of the constitutions to recognize South African Sign Language as an official language, to elevate it from being its current status of being a language of promotion or for developmental purposes. We believe this will go a long way in addressing the exclusion of persons with disabilities, including persons who are deaf, that they face in society. So I think we welcome this bill, Chairperson, as COSATU. We think it's a progressive bill and it seeks to really facilitate recognition of the rights of persons with disabilities, in general, but in particular, South Africans with hearing disabilities. And I think we do want to acknowledge that we have in South Africa a very vibrant and diverse community of persons who are deaf or hard of hearing, many of whom communicate through South African Sign Language. And I think I see in the attendance today some of the pioneers like Bruno Drushen in attendance, and they've done excellent work in Deaf SA. So I think, Chair, for us, South African Sign Language is a complex, is a nuanced language, has evolved over generations, and it is a primary means of communications for many persons who are deaf in South Africa. And despite this, it's not yet recognized as an official language, and this does have significant implications for persons who are deaf. About 250,000 South Africans do currently use South African Sign Language, but we have a significant gap where about 4 million people have varying degrees of hearing disabilities and would need some support to learn South African Sign Language, to be able to access it, etc. I think, Chair, it's also critical just to take a step back and to say, well, persons with disabilities, including those with hearing impairments, really face significant barriers and often exclusion from fully participating in society. And of course, I think we've always taken a stance in South Africa, including the Constitution, being quite unique in the world, that the recognition of language is important towards building an inclusive society. So that we thus want to support as COSATU this amendment. And we believe it's been drafted in a manner that is consistent with the principles of the Constitution, and especially the Bill of Rights. I think we want to highlight that many people with disabilities really encounter serious barriers towards being able to participate in society. For persons who have hearing impairments, these start with abilities simply to communicate with other persons. And of course, communications is at the center of one's ability to integrate with society. And these challenges, continue. And often it's about people with hearing disabilities, about just the simple obstacles the inability for other people to understand them. So this does limit access to education, especially in rural areas, to healthcare, to employment opportunities, as well as a broader societal exclusion. We think the non-recognition currently of South African Sign Language as an official language is a contributor towards this problem. And so, yeah, again, Chair, we've got about 4 million people who have some hearing disabilities. That's about 7% of the population. So it's quite a significant segment of the population. And despite the size of this community, Chair, they really face significant access to many, many essential services of life. Chair, we think that without the recognition of South African Sign Language as an official language, there's consequences. So it's not taught in most schools or many schools. There are no legal requirements for businesses or for public institutions to provide sign language interpretation services. And sure, we do it at a symbolic level when the president makes, important announcements, but beyond that, it's largely marginalized and forgotten. So this does have a significant impact upon the deaf community. Children are often excluded from mainstream schools due to a lack of sign language interpretation services. This obviously has an impact upon the educational levels they are able to attain, and of course that has an impact upon your ability to find decent work, etc. There's the issue of accessing healthcare services because of a lack of interpretation services in hospitals and clinics. And again, there's a consequence in terms of lower health outcomes for those persons. That has an impact upon chronic health and life expectancy in general. So, Chair, I think as COSATU, we strongly support the principles of social justice and equality, and hence we support the recognition of sign language as an official language. The Constitution, to state the obvious, is inclusive. It enshrines the principles of equality, of human dignity, of non-discrimination. And we think it's imperative that the rights of persons with disabilities, including those with hearing impairments, are recognized and are elevated and protected. So, Chair, we think the recognition of sign language will go a long way towards recognizing the issues. It's a foundational intervention. It's not going to produce miracles overnight, but it's a positive affirmation. We think it's going to help nudge government and schools to begin to ensure sign language is taught in schools, that interpretation services are available in public institutions, especially healthcare institutions, universities, etc. We think this is going to help persons who are deaf to access education, healthcare, other essential services. That's going to improve the overall quality of life, and that will benefit society at large. Amending the Constitution will also require government to ensure that there are adequate resources provided to ensure that people with hearing impairments are not excluded from society, for interpreters, for educational materials, to access public services, etc. If we want to look internationally, Chair, we think there are some positive examples we could just simply highlight, who have recognized sign language as an official language, and they've seen positive results. New Zealand did so in 2006. And since then, I think we've seen New Zealand sign language being taught in schools, interpretation services becoming more widely available. And this has helped improve the educational outcomes for children who are deaf, improved access to healthcare and essential services and so forth. I think in the US, we saw similar intervention in 1990, where you now find American Sign Language being taught in schools. And again, interpretation services become more widely available. And again, improved outcomes around education, health, and access to essential services. So, Chair, I think for us as COSATU, simply we support the bill. We think there will also be cultural benefits. There's a very kind of vibrant culture amongst the deaf community, and this is going to help preserve and promote it. We think it also will help raise awareness of the experiences and the needs of persons who have hearing impairments, promote greater understanding of the challenges, greater inclusion. And I think, Chair, we believe it will help create a more inclusive society where all persons, including with disabilities, can fully participate and also contribute to South Africa's development. So in conclusion, Chair, we want to say that we think there are many compelling reasons why we should recognize sign language as an official language. The issues of education, of health, essential services, promotion of the rights of individuals, of culture. We've seen the positive international experiences we can learn from. We think it's important to recognize the importance of sign language and ensure that all persons who are hearing impairments have equal access to opportunities and services that the Constitution requires us to provide to everybody. So we support this recognition, we support the bill. We believe it will go a long way forward in addressing the exclusion that persons with disabilities in general face, but in particular those with hearing impairments. So I think we urge Parliament to act on this matter, to ensure our constitution is more inclusive and South Africans can fully participate. And I think lastly, Chair, that besides us welcoming the bill, we do urge a speedy passage by Parliament over the course of this year, and as sanctioned by the President subsequently, and we want to see this being done before the 2024 elections. We also think lastly, Chair, that it's critical that Parliament, all committees, not just the Justice Committee, be more active in holding all government departments at all levels of the state, from national to local, to SOEs, etc., accountable for integrating persons with disability and ensure that adequate resources are provided for this in government's budgets. So that's our presentation, Chair. Yeah, I think it's straightforward, Chair. I think we just want to, appreciate the work done by Parliament in drafting this bill, and we look forward to it being passed into law. So that's our presentation, Chair, and I hope I helped save some time for the committee's hearings today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthew Parks, and from COSATU. Members, that is the presentation from COSATU. I have the following members who would want to ask questions or make comments. Honorable Yako, Honorable Nuvot, two hands in that order. Honorable Yako.
Thank you so much, Chair, for indulging me. Thank you to COSATU for their presentation. I just have two questions. Why does COSATU think it took so long to integrate sign language? I mean, you said in your presentation, we've got 7% of deaf people in this country, and understanding that the numbers, those are the numbers that we know. Why do you think it took so long for this bill to come into fruition, understanding that you're part of the collective government that is currently running South Africa? Secondly, my next question is how many, the last paragraph, you said you must hold government entities accountable for integrating deaf people into their spaces. How many deaf people has COSATU integrated into their offices as an entity or as an organization? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Yako. Honorable Nuvot Truchan.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, and good morning to everybody on the platform. I would also like to thank COSATU for their presentation, and thank you to COSATU for the support that they have given for South African Sign Language to be made official. And thank you, Matthew. I know that you yourself has come a long way with people with disabilities because you were the first office in Parliament supporting the new members with disabilities at that time. So I know that you have an understanding of where we come from. Now, just one question I have to COSATU. All along, many government departments keep on saying, oh, it's too expensive, expensive for us to have sign language interpreters. But regularly we've made some achievements, obviously, in this. But what is COSATU's view? What would you tell the government departments who do say that there's no funding for this or things like that? So I would just like to hear what COSATU's perspective is on that, and then can the Secretary please unpin Honourable Mayor Drucken.
Thank you very much, Honourable Nuvot Truchan. Any other comments or questions before I hand over to COSATU? None. Mr. Matthew Parks from COSATU.
Okay. No, thanks very much, Chen. Yeah, thanks to all members for the helpful questions. I think it's always positive, Chair, when you have this kind of legislation where I would suspect, without being presumptuous, that all political parties, support these kind of progressive developmental interventions. So I think, Chair, just to Honourable Yako's questions, why did it take so long? Look, I think that's, that's the heart of the issue. And I think everybody in society is guilty of that, or most people. I think it's symbolic of how people with disabilities of all types, whether it's hearing, mental, visual, physical, etc., face huge barriers, especially on the issue of education and communication and transport and so on. And look, I mean, obviously South Africa, without beating the apartheid drums, comes from a very brutal background. And I don't think we have fully addressed all issues. We have huge backlogs on many fronts, especially on the disability front. I think there's no condemnation, no justification. And this itself, this intervention, whilst it's a progressive intervention, is just one simple drop in the ocean for the broader issues of disability rights. It's a very progressive one, but there's many more that need to be addressed afterwards. We are an evolving democracy. We have a huge amount of socioeconomic challenges facing us, many issues. But I think on the disability front, I think, to be honest, we have really neglected as a society, leave aside our party t-shirts, I think all of society, all of us, whether it's government, business, whether it's schools or churches, political parties, trade unions, all of us are guilty. One does appreciate, Chair, that you wouldn't amend the Constitution every year. I think there's a specific rule as well that you do it once a year. But we do appreciate that here is actually not a brand new intervention, it's actually elevating sign language from being an official developmental language to an official language. So again, Parliament has had some thought about it. But nonetheless, Chair, I think the main thing is that people with disabilities have huge access on many fronts. We have to continue to push society forward. It won't be easy. I think that's why we have progressive organizations like Honorable Vilma Nuhadrushan comes from, like Disabled People South Africa, Deaf SA, Blind SA, many others who constantly push society, push Parliament. I think that's where you will see progress. Chair, I think on that same point to the question about COSATU, no, we are also guilty of it, Chairperson. If I look at the top of my head, I'm not aware of anybody who is deaf in COSATU. I think there are a few persons who have disabilities to the COSATU's head count, but it's not enough. And I think you've seen in all the employment equity stats, whether it's at government, political parties, trade unions, businesses, everybody's guilty of not employing enough people with disabilities. And also often the people who want to employ with disabilities often ends up being perhaps a person who uses a wheelchair. And often because that person was recently disabled, so they had access to education beforehand, so it's easier for them to find work opportunities, etc., as opposed to maybe a person who was born with a disability and who's faced exclusion from the moment they were born. But nonetheless, Chair, I think we must continue as activists, whether we're the ANC or COSATU, the EFF, the DA, etc., ACTP, all of us have an obligation to push society. And this is a challenge all of us have to make some contribution. Chair, I think to Honorable Nuhadrushan, I mean, I thank you to her, and I think it's always been positive to see a member like Vilma, who's constantly raised the rights of persons with disabilities, including hearing impairments. I think she's raising a very critical question, Chair, and often government will say many issues that there's not enough money. Well, I think the Chair, we should ask, what are the costs of excluding people? Because South Africa's greatest strength has always been our diversity. And I think if we want to grow society, we must make sure all 60 million people have opportunity to fulfill their potential, have access to education, to transport, to health, to the police, to employment, etc. We're not going to sustain a society where we have, for example, like right now, 15 million people working, 27 million people dependent on social grants because they're not able to find work opportunities. So I think for us, that's a critical thing. Let's invest in society on all fronts. We also have the issue of humanity, where our constitution is a very progressive constitution, and it speaks to our very progressive definition of social economic rights. The constitution is not unreasonable, Chair. It says we must have an incremental approach towards achieving it. It recognizes the fiscal constraints we will have for many years, but it doesn't mean the government has an excuse, and not just government, business as well, universities, schools, etc., all have an obligation. Chair, I think maybe the last thing is that the issue of costs. We do appreciate that the fiscal space is under huge pressure, but a simple way to generate more revenue for the state, one is that we tackle more decisively corruption, wasteful expenditure. We grow the economy, we fix ESCOM, etc. But a very simple way, Chair, is that we allocate more resources to the South African Revenue Service, because for every 1 billion rand you give to SARS, they can probably give you back 10 billion rand in additional revenue. And that enables the state to expand the quality of public service it has. So I think, Chair, I mean, we know this is just a simple elevation of a sign language as an official language, but it's a useful spotlight to say to all of us, we can do better and we must do much better for all of our citizens. And so I think it's a positive thing, Chair. We really do want to appreciate the work done by the committee and really do look forward to this bill being passed into law. And I think we'll become better for it as a society. But thanks very much, Chair, to members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthew Parks from COSATU for the presentation and for COSATU's continued support in the form of making presentations to bills that are being debated in the House. Your involvement in public hearings and making submissions is highly appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is CRL ready to present? Committee Secretary, you had a problem of getting CRL earlier. Were you able to succeed?
Good morning, Chairperson. We've had no success.
No success. Maybe we will give them one more last chance. We will call them again as the last organization to present at 5 to 12. Can we go to Professor du Plessis? Is he ready?
I'm ready, Chair. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you, Professor du Plessis. You are welcome.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So obviously, I'm the unpopular guy for the day, but I nevertheless appreciate the opportunity to make a presentation. And thanks for the committee secretariat.
Before you proceed, Professor du Plessis, you have 20 minutes, after which you members would have an opportunity to ask you questions or make comments on your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I did submit a more substantial response to the secretariat, so members are welcome to look at that. It's both in English and Afrikaans. So my topic is why I consider it not appropriate to declare South African Sign Language an official language. Now, what I'll be looking at in my short presentation starting are the following. What is an official language? The situation in South Africa, language rights in South Africa, that's the issue that comes up all the time concerning SASOL, current status of SASOL, conclusion, and then I have a proposal to make. So there are many definitions for what an official language is, but let's take the more general one made by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that says it's a language that with legal status in a particularly legally constituted political entity such as the state, and which serves as a language of administration. Obviously, state administration. Now, in other words, if you break that up, language of administration generally means language you use in laws and regulations, in government records, in official forms, let's say you have to register a birth, etc. Written communication between government agencies and spoken communication of officials doing their official business, obviously not in the tea room. But some clever researchers have pointed out that you actually in real practice get three types of official languages. Obviously, the general one is statutory official languages. So those are languages declared by law as official languages. Mentioning a language in the constitution without stating it as official does not render that language official, only when it is named official. That's the one type, that's de jure, as we know. Then you have symbolic official languages. These are languages used for symbolic purposes. They're not used regularly in the language of administration capacities that I've mentioned just now, but they used now and then in the opening of parliament, somebody would say a line in the language, the interpreters would run crazy around to try and interpret, and then it stops. Or it's used for projects, nice projects get named in these languages, but generally they're not used functionally. And then you get working official languages, and those are the languages used for day-to-day business to conduct state business. That is then also what we mean by a language of administration. So keep this in mind. If we look at the South African situation, now we are talking about 4 language domains here, legislation, so laws and language of record, what happens in justice, what happens in government administration, and what happens in education. The interesting thing is that you all know the Constitution requires government, national and provincial, to function in at least 2 official languages. Could be more. It's not advisable to be more, but at least 2. And then, as you all know, we also have the Use of Official Languages Act, the one at the bottom that I bolded, which actually have extended that to a minimum of 3, which was wise. And 3 is usually considered the maximum. You should not function in more, you cannot function in more than 3 official languages. Now, what's very interesting, the Rules Committee of Parliament, in their joint rules already in 1998, declared that legislation should be published in one of the official languages and translated in at least one other language. So at least here you have the 2 minimum languages required by the Constitution. This rule has not been adapted to be lined up with the Use of Official Languages Act that requires a minimum of 3. But in practice, what happens is you can go and check all laws are conceived or conceptualized in English. Then you go to what some of very controversial decisions made by the Department of Justice, the same department of this committee, where the heads of court made a decision in 2017 that only English is recognized as the language of record in the court. And that's because it's too complicated for the Department of Justice to function in more than one English, it seems. The good thing that the department did do is the project Introduction of Indigenous Languages in one court in each province, started in 2009. I'm not sure where that project stands, but that's a very admirable project, and that's trying to get another language into functioning in courts. At the bottom 2 corners, you have what the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture is trying to do. They've been making lots of policies trying to deal with our official languages. The National Language Policy Framework introduced a rotation system. As you all know, that was blown off the table, but that was an attempt to function in at least 3 official languages. And it goes with the implementation plan. I'll get back to the Use of Official Languages Act. And then when we have this important act, the Language Practitioners Council Act, that tries to legislate how we should deal with interpreting services, and so on. I don't know what happened to that act. We hear very little about it. And then the last one is education. We know the South African Schools Act rules that all official languages should be treated equally in terms of the curriculum, and that you cannot discriminate against people for choosing their languages. It's not referring to the language medium, but subjects. Then there's also a very commendable project, the introduction of implementation of African languages project, where these languages have been, the Sintu languages have been made compulsory. And then we have the higher education language policy framework that kind of shoots down all of this, because it determines that English must be one of the languages in higher education, and then with an additional indigenous language. Okay. What's important about the Use of Official Languages Act is that it requires all state entities to make a language policy that use at least 3 languages in communication with the public. So that's language of administration, the one I referred to in the beginning. Recently, a WITS colleague has done a study of these policies and says that actually nothing has changed. The state's entities function primarily in English. Then it has a very interesting but powerful clause that deals with non-official languages. And it says here that state entities must make provision for the people whose choice of language is not an official language or South African Sign Language. And it compels these agencies, all of them, to accommodate people with this choice. Now, I've heard 2 members already spoken about the fact that people using sign language are not accommodated. It implies this clause in the Act is not implemented. And this is actually a very powerful clause. I'll come back to it. What about language rights? We have 2 sets of language rights in the Constitution. We have Section 6 dealing with official languages and not with rights about these languages. It deals with how these languages should be managed. How the state should deal with it, advancing the previously marginalized languages, how government should use it, and then what is PANSALB's mandate. I'm not going into the detail, we all know that, but it's important to know that you as a citizen cannot make any claims on rights in terms of Section 6 because it does not make provision for language rights. Language rights we find in the Bill of Rights. We call them linguistic human rights. So these are universal rights you find in all countries, democratic countries. The only one of these rights that are linked to an official language is the one dealing with, you have the option of language choice of getting education in the official language note of your choice. That's the only one that limits it to official languages. All the other rights that have been implicated this morning in 2 members' responses already, all of them are not linked to an official language, not to be discriminated against based on language. Doesn't say official language, that you can use your language in an official, unofficial language domains, etc. These are all linguistic human rights that all of us enjoy, irrespective of our language being an official language. So if people feel their rights are not enjoyed, or they don't enjoy it, something is wrong then with implementing these requirements. So what is the current status of SASL? SASL is a unique language, a very, very small language. Every time I hear people quoting figures, they become more. Today I heard there are 4 million people with hearing disabilities. I really don't trust those figures. We can only go with what the census say, and we also know people with a range of hearing disabilities don't necessarily associate with the deaf community. Just keep that in mind. But anyway, SASL has special status, as we know, in education. And the great thing is that it took government a long time, 1996 to 2014, to respond to the fact that it's an official language in schools. I hope it doesn't take that long to fix the electricity. And then it took a little bit more longer to get it into schools as a second additional language. So what we still need is getting it as a first additional language, but there's progress. Technically, it is official in state entities. As I've mentioned now, the Use of Official Language Act makes provision for people using sign language to be accommodated. That same choice is not provided for speakers of official languages. We do not have that right. The only right we have is that we should know, we hope to know one of the 3 languages that the state choose to function in. That is required by this act. So we don't, as speakers, we don't have the same right as, for instance, the deaf community. So that's a very strong right that is written into the Use of Official Languages Act. And then, of course, we have the SASL Language Charter. And there are also other legislations, because of time, I'm not mentioning. Then, at the same time, we have a special status community, a community with special disabilities. And so we have disability legislation that also promotes effectively sign language, labor legislation doing the same, broadcasting legislation. So again, if the deaf community feels denied their rights, something is wrong. If people with another disability feel their rights are denied, those people that are not deaf, for instance, they speak spoken language. Let's say they speak Afrikaans, they have another disability, they feel their rights are denied. The answer to their problem is not making their language official. The answer to the problem is a deal with legislation that already exists, beautiful legislation, just implement it. You don't need to make more legislation to implement already sufficient legislation. So in conclusion, really, to be honest, there's not really much to gain making South African Sign Language 12 official language, because, as I've pointed out, the South African official languages are mostly symbolic. They are not used on par with English as languages of administration. English is technically, if you look at the OECD definition, the only official language functioning in the country. So we need to know that. And my concern is that we are creating all kinds of expectations among the deaf community members about what will happen, the wonderful miracle that will happen once their language is official. Within the context of a range of legislation that already caters very, very sufficiently for these communities, that it's just not implemented. I'm also concerned that the South African Sign Language will actually lose its special status, especially in terms of the Use of Official Languages Act. That is a very powerful clause there. If you retain it, making South African Sign Language an official language, and you retain that clause, then you are privileging a official language and official language above the other. So that clause will have to be removed, but then you use that beautiful provision. And then, as I've said more than once, current legislation provides adequately for the deaf community to enjoy all the same rights that the hearing community has. The problem lies, and I think member Niva Drugen has alluded to that. The problem is that there's not proper costing done for these services to be rendered, and there's not proper implementation done. I've read through many of the PMG reports, and I must thank them for this, about your proceedings in Parliament, all the committees. And I've seen member Niva Drugen not once, many times raise this issue over years about not adequate interpreting services and so on and so on. And the Use of Official Languages Act provides for that, but it means it's not implemented. So that is my story. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay. I was saying I left with 3 minutes, but seemingly you are done.
Okay, I'll repeat my last sentence.
Okay.
be concerned about creating false expectations, rather look at what can be done. So in that sense, I have a proposal, and the proposal is to do what more than 30 countries have done, and that is to consider a special language act for sign language. In our case, a South African Sign Language Act. The last country that did it very recently was the Netherlands. Now, if you look at this slide, can you see my slide?
No, we can't see the slide.
Yeah, so I haven't actually shared my slide. How do I do that, Chair? I don't know on...
Maybe you can talk to your slide and circulate it after.
Yeah, okay, I don't know how Zoom works. We usually at university use another option. The World Federation of the Deaf has a very nice map of the types of recognition of sign language all over the world. Only 7 countries recognize it as an official language. Not many, only 7. But more than 30 countries have made special language acts for their sign languages. Something like our language charter, but we can make it just stronger. And then in the end, 70 countries recognize sign language in some or another way. But just to repeat, only 7 as an official language. So my proposal is that we already have enough legislation to cover the needs of the deaf, but we can strengthen those needs by making a special language act for sign language. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Professor du Plessis. Members, that is the presentation by Professor du Plessis. Are there any questions? I have the following members: Honorable Swart, Honorable Nivot, 2 hands in that order.
Thank you, Past Chair, and thank you, Professor, for your input. Professor, whilst I appreciate that you've indicated that there is existing legislation, is the challenge not, as you indicated, that that legislation is not being implemented sufficiently to protect the rights of our deaf community? And will the elevation by means of a constitutional amendment not then ensure that the due attention is given to the deaf community? Your proposal to possibly have a special act, special language act, might well face the same problem because it is a normal law. And again, as you indicated, existing laws are there. You say they're sufficient, but they're not being implemented. Would a special language act not face the same problem? And in other words, by elevating in Section 6 of the Constitution, the language, the Deaf Language Act, the Sign Language Act, to this, it gives far greater attention and almost will ensure to a large degree that there is due implementation of the protection of the South African Deaf Language Act. I think I need to understand, whilst I appreciate your input and the fact that there could be other legislation, but we see a lack of implementation there. I think the second issue which you do raise is the question of costing as well. And obviously we as a committee will have to decide on that, because I noticed in the memorandum that there is a vague allusion to the financial implications, and we are obliged to cost bills when we pass that. But I do understand that what you are proposing is going against what will probably be the common thread, and bearing in mind that Parliament already passed a resolution following the Constitutional Review Committee some years ago to implement this constitutional amendment. So I appreciate your input, and everyone is entitled to make that input, and I think we'll seriously consider it. But that is my concern, is the fact of even a special language act not having the same implementation or implementation that one is struggling with at the moment. And if you give the existing provision, section 6.5, which requires the South African Pan-African Language Board to create conditions for the development of sign language, and that doesn't seem to have happened. That is why this amendment is being proposed. So there seems to be a challenge in this area. So I'd like your comments on that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, I think it illustrates thank you, Member Swart. I think it illustrates
Professor Du Plessis.
Sorry, Ntade.
Yes, no, just wait a bit. We will get all members to make their comments or ask questions, then you will have an opportunity to respond to all of them.
Sorry, Lord.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nivor Tuchan. Thank you very much, Honorable Swart.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good morning to Professor Du Plessis. Thank you for making your submission here. I was rather a bit disappointed to read your submission because this is from the University of the Free State, and this is from the Unit of South African Sign Language and Deaf Studies. So you are in the university, and you are in this particular university, and it has 2 units related to South African Sign Language. And the university has provided a lot of support to the development of South African Sign Language. So, and then particularly knowing the history of the university, in terms of Dr. Philemon Akach, he was one of those with DEFSA who presented at the Constitutional Review Committee to lobby for South African Sign Language to be in the Constitution. Dr. Akach was one of the lecturers at the University of in the Sign Language Department. Pointed that through this submission, the it's actually not support. And I know that there are numerous people who want this elevation of South African Sign Language. Secondly, you said the courts say that the language of record is English. I understand that, but they also have a range of interpreters when they are required with, spoken languages. If it's Xhosa, for example, it's Xhosa. They have spoken language interpreters, and many courts, they say, well, South African Sign Language is not official, so we are not obliged to have South African Sign Language in court proceedings. And then cases are delayed because there's a delay in getting interpreters. So we need to be aware of the situation on the ground. We need to be aware of what is happening. And that's part of the reason why deaf people are lobbying for South African Sign Language to be an official language. And then in your presentation, particularly under from 495, you talk about Ugandan Sign Language. I have had contact with deaf people in Uganda where the language is official. What I'm not clear about is that in your submission, you, in the same line, you put Tanzania. Yeah, so you've got Uganda, and then in the same line, you've got Tanzania. So is it Uganda and, well, Uganda and Tanzania are 2 different countries, firstly. So I don't understand in your presentation why you've got Ugandan Sign Language and then Tanzanian, because those are unrelated. So I don't know if the submission needs correction, and I don't know if it's, in both your Afrikaans and English version. So it says USL simply recognized by Tanzania, by the Tanzanian Constitution. Uganda and Tanzania are 2 different countries. And I know that USL is recognized. It's one of the first African countries to have recognized their sign language. And then that's all from me, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think for the purposes of clarity, Prof. Du Plessis, are you representing the University of Free State?
No, obviously not. I'm an emeritus professor, so this is my personal opinion. The member actually, we've met many years ago when she helped us to establish sign language at this university. We were the first university that established sign language as a major subject, also at postgraduate level. So it's my personal opinion. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Professor. I just wanted to establish that for the benefit of people who are watching us at home. Honorable Maseko Jele.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning, Professor and the team and the colleagues. Chair, because I was not privy to the presentation when he was presenting, maybe some of the issues should have been clarified today. I will listen. I think I'll listen to the responses from what my colleagues have already alluded, but one thing I wanted maybe to find out from Professor, since that he admitted that he is presenting, it is her own opinion. At the end, he gave us his preference in terms of the act. Chair, I wanted more information on that in terms of his choice, but I think what Honorable Swart asked covered me a little bit in terms of that. So I would listen to the professor's response in connection with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Maseko Jele. Over to you, Prof. Du Plessis.
Okay, let me work from the back forward. The last member, Maseko Jele, maybe when I answer Member Swart, hopefully I address your question. But first of all, my appreciation to Member Niwa Druchen for actually reading my presentation. And my apology for the mistake. I'm talking about the Ugandan constitution. You will see in the references that I referred to the Ugandan. So somewhere I made a mistake. Obviously, I know two different countries, but neither of them recognize sign language as an official language. One must make a distinction between legally recognizing a language, as I've said in my presentation, like the Ugandan language constitution does. It recognizes in the constitution sign language as a language that must be promoted. But the Uganda constitution clearly says there are two official languages in Uganda, and that is English and Swahili. So that's what I mean. Make a distinction between legally recognizing a language and recognizing a language as an official language. Regarding your point on the courts, Member Niwat Druchen, again, the linguistic human rights that we found in the Bill of Rights make provision for a person that cannot follow proceedings of the court to the right of having an interpreter. So that right already exists. It's a linguistic human right. It has nothing to do with whether that language is official or not. As you know, in our courts, we sometimes have people speaking Polish, sometimes other languages from the continent that are accommodated. So because it's a linguistic human right. And again, if people do not get that right, it's not because their language is not official, it's because it's not provided for as it should be. So it means that right is not provided for by the state. That's where the problem lies. And that's why I appreciate the fact that you keep on raising the issue, but it seems it's not helping. So that brings me to the point that Member Swart made, a very valid point. I've made the suggestion of a language act purely because I know the language charter, which in a way is already a language act, does maybe not carry enough weight. And it seems there is a need within the community to be recognized in some way. So it's like a compromise. But I fully agree with you. No extra law, even if it's a provision in the Constitution, will help to address the lack of implementation that already exists. So that's why it, make it an official language. We know it's symbolically important, all of that, but it's not going to address the problems that already exist. And in fact, it might become a smokescreen for not implementing existing legislation. So I agree with you. Even the Language Act won't address the problems. But I'm just explaining, for me, it was like a compromise. Don't shoot everything down. Make some proposal that can be some symbolic gesture towards this very small community. Yeah, I hope I've answered all your concerns and questions. It's difficult to remember everything over a time.
Yes. No, Prof, just one issue.
Yeah.
You were not agreeing with COSATU's numbers, that there are close to 4 million people that have hearing disability. So do you have any number, or do you have any numbers or any research that gives you the numbers that contradicts COSATU's numbers?
Yes, Chair, myself not, but these numbers are kind of projections on postulations, and they might not be incorrect, but they also might not be correct. So I think, honestly, one cannot make decisions on the basis of guessed numbers or projected numbers. Now, the problem with that is the next speaker will, has already pointed that out, Bruno Drugen. The problem is that you don't get exact figures from the census on disability at large. Previous censuses did that, but in our current census, or the last available one, they don't have that figure. So you don't know exactly the figures. So it should be something that Parliament could concern itself with, is trying to obtain exact figures so we can stop this guessing and, everyone adds a few million the next time there's an argument. And because I hear it's been used, these figures, make an argument. Okay, so you have Chivenda as an official language, but that's a small community. So we need to make the language of the hearing people with hearing disability also an official language. And I think that's not a correct basis for making such decisions. And as I've mentioned, the community of people with a hearing disability is a very wide community. Ranging from all kinds of stages. Early people that, first of all, use sign language, that identify with the deaf community. We must keep in mind the deaf community is a very exclusive community for very good reasons. But you cannot be part of the deaf community if you're not deaf. So if you have a hearing disability, you are not necessarily part of the deaf community. So we must keep that in mind. That's the problem with these figures.
Thank you very much, Professor Du Plessis. Thank you for taking or making an effort to contribute to this 18th constitutional amendment. Thank you for your input. Thank you very much. Members, we will now invite Deaf South Africa. Is Deaf South Africa ready?
Can we please share, can we share our screen, please?
Deaf South Africa, can you proceed? Members, can we take a short break to allow them to sort out their connection problems? Can we come back at 25 to 11? Is that in order?
It's fine, Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
Deaf SA, can you test your audio, please? We can see the presentation. Can you go maybe to your next slide? And also test your audio while you're doing it. Hello?
Yes, we're busy sorting it out. How can you hear us?
You are quite clear. Is there
Thank you.
anyone who's going to be, are you using the same device or laptop?
No. Bruno Drugen is going to present in sign language. I'm just facilitating the presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. But you're very clear, your audio is perfect.
Can we proceed? Deaf South Africa, are you ready to proceed?
Thank you. Can everyone see me? Can I proceed?
Yes, proceed, but we don't see you.
Okay, I can proceed. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to everyone, especially to the honourable parliamentarians, to this portfolio committee. And let us look at what Mandela says in his quote. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. So before I want to proceed with my presentation, so many people have been wondering, and especially that we wondering what language are we using. I'm using South African Sign Language. I'm proudly deaf, and I'm using South African Sign Language every day. Like exactly what Kusatu said is that we have approximately 4 million deaf people and hard of hearing people in South Africa, but approximately 600,000 deaf people are using South African Sign Language. We're using South African Sign Language, and South African Sign Language is a language with its own structure, which has then body movements and facial expression within the language. We recognize South African Sign Language as a language, and South African Sign Language is the backbone of the deaf South Africans in South Africa, and DEFSA values this acquisition, usage, and preservation of SSL. And South African Sign Language is a visual language, and it's been for years within the deaf community. And deaf children is using South African Sign Language, is also used at universities. So deaf people are also doing their academic degree in South African Sign Language. What I would like to share with the honourable members, the first submission was made in 2007 on the 16th of February, where I presented to Parliament, and it's a full circle to come and do this presentation on the 7th of March 2003. And just to give you a journey, and I would like to take members through a journey where we were and where we went through, and then what we had at this, and where we come with what we are discussing today. And in 2007, we made our first submission to the Constitutional Review Committee, and then members will see that we've made several submissions. It was also then in 2013, and then in 2015, we did another submission and do an oral presentation as well. In 2016, DEFSA decided to have national marches across all 9 provinces. So we marched, and then also 32,000 deaf people have signed a petition that was handed into Parliament that we want South African Sign Language as an official language. So it was then presented to the parliamentarian legal advisors, and PANSOP and the CRPDC also made then presentations. And then if we go then to 2018, 17, is that we all know that, like it was referred to also today, is that the 8th of November, the NCRP, that recommendation to make South African Sign Language was approved. and then also the National Assembly in 23rd of November. That was then approved. DEFSA also made a recommendation to the Human Resource Development Council, and then also you will see is that we also, with the UNCRPD report, that South Africa must fast track the process to get South African Sign Language as an official language. And we also said at the HRDC that we want this as a home language. So we had a webinar with the Department of Social Development, interpreter's mistake, with the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, where we would like to know where we stand and what process has been followed after the President has announced it in his SONA in 2020 that South African Sign must be an official language. So, and then Cabinet, we all know the Cabinet approved that the bill needs to be referred for comments on 25th of May. And then where we are now with Parliament, where comments was then asked for this. So DEFSA has submitted a submission to this committee, and this is where the process is. So from 2007 up to we are at this stage, this is the journey that SSL 12 have taken us through. So we have been patient as a deaf community. And I also want to share with the members the legislative background in terms of South African Sign Language. And we know that South African Sign Language is recognized in the Constitution of South Africa, and it was brought into 1996. The South African Schools Act of 1996, which refers to say that South African Sign Language must be as a medium of instruction. The use of Official Languages Act of 2012, it mentions that states that national departments, national public entities, and the national public enterprises must make provision to communicate with people whose language of choice is SSL. We know that the government has adopted the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Uses of Sign Language. And then I will elaborate there on the second slide more on the convention, but the Language Practitioners Bill was also approved, also encompasses South African Sign Language. So members, because of time, I would like you to read these articles, but we have Article 2 that defines by languages by including sign languages. And please, you can read it on your own time. Then why is it important to have South African Sign Language approved? First is accessibility, to have access to education services and legal proceedings in government. And then also secondly is equality, by recognizing us as a deaf community. And we know that we have all these 11 languages and soon South African Sign Language, but we want equality. We don't want to be not equal to other languages and to other citizens in South Africa. But through equality, we can promote inclusivity and equality, break down barriers of marginalization. So, and we want to break down these barriers and to enjoy our equality in terms of the Constitution. And then international obligation, like I said, the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities states and to recognize and promote the use of sign languages. Then economic benefits is then also to create opportunities for businesses to cater to the needs of the deaf and hard of hearing communities. creation of jobs, and development of new products and services. And the hearing communities can also benefit from this. Yes. And this creates opportunities for us. And I will explain this on another slide later on. South African Sign Language, we want equal recognition for our language, what is stated by the WFD, the World Federation of the Deaf, where languages are recognized. In 74 languages, so, sign language is recognized in their countries. And then where they lobbied to their governments for equal recognition. It's either in an act or in an official language. This is then a summary of what's happening around the world. The standardization of South African Sign Language. Many times government says that because of the variations in signs, that it's impossible for us to approve South African Sign Language. We as a deaf community say no. Because of South African Sign Language, we as a deaf community accept the variations and the dialects. But that happened because of apartheid. Apartheid has segregated the deaf community, and after democracy, the deaf community start to unite, and we signed together, for example, what was said, the Xhosa spoken languages, for example, in the Eastern Cape and Xhosa in Johannesburg, there's variations. But you, as the Xhosa speaking language and the users of the language, accept those variations. And in Western Cape and in Pretoria, Afrikaans is used differently. But we accept that that's Afrikaans, because everybody accepts the variations in the language. So the UN Convention, Article 21, says it obligates the states parties to recognize and promote the use of sign languages. In the spirit of the convention, sign language should be promoted in the form that they can be used by the deaf communities around the world. Another, in English, where we all know in spoken languages like a lorry and a truck, it's exactly the same meaning, but there's a variation in those two words. There's two words that use for the same meaning. And we also have that in South African Sign Language, like mom, mother. I know you don't know sign languages and members, and I do respect that. But for example, we have signs for mother, some signs mother. There's two variations, but it's the same meaning. And we accept those variations in South African Sign Language. And what it states here, we do not want to prevent this for applying to South African signing, that there must be standardization in South African Sign Language. So we, sometimes when the variations sometimes are from age differences, regionals, where people are living, gender, education, family background. So we adapt the variations in South African Sign Language. So I'm going to ask to make this to your attention, not to make South African Sign Language. So I'm going to give over to.
We are left with 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Caitlin?
What was said? Sorry, please repeat that.
I was saying he is left with 5 minutes.
Okay, not a problem, sir. Thank you so much. All right, so thank you, Chair. In regards to South African Sign Language and the economy, how does it benefit the economy? By approving the South African Sign Language as an official language is by you will create more education. The schools will be officialized in one sign, and also with the sign line with CAPS, it will be in South African Sign Language. Universities as well will be offered that opportunity to learn sign language, and that is a good profit for the economy. With International Sign Language and the Charter, we do recognize South African Sign Language on the 23rd of September. 1st of September will be Deaf Awareness. We have partnered up with them to make more awareness for South African Sign Language in the world. We use the 23rd of September to create more awarenesses for everyone to start learning. What has been done so far with South African Sign Language and the material, if it is going to be approved, will it be more expensive? No, we have various opportunities such as the CAPS, the basic education. We would like to partner with them, deaf center schools as well at the universities. We will be using CAPS in South African Sign Language. South African Sign Language will be taught in all the deaf schools, but also we would like to implement it in all the universities like Free State, Stellenbosch, and Venda as well. They have already implemented South African Sign Language in the universities, but we want to create it at a higher level as well. So far, South African Sign Language interpreters have been growing. We have quite a number, we have 10 South African Sign Languages that interpreters that have been accredited so far. Also in the universities online, we provide relay services online with interpreters. We are setting that in various provinces. That is what we have achieved so far. Lastly, South African Sign Language is the core and the heart of deaf people. We are quite strong in using the language, and we would love for it to be the 12th official language to create a relationship with various people across the world. The deaf community enjoy equal rights, and thank you so much for that. That's all from my side, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now open this opportunity for members to ask questions or to make comments. Are there any questions or comments, Honorable Maseko Jele? Seemingly you're the only one for now.
Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. And also thank you to our presenters. The only question or clarity that I would request from our presenters, the last sentence is that the death, in fact, it triggered the question that has always been in my mind when she said the deaf language enjoys equal rights like any other languages. But I had this question of saying, when the presenter, was presenting, she said it will be introduced, yes, to deaf schools, universities, and yes, in universities. But my question was that would it be harm, or how about introducing it to schools where normal, I'll say normal in brackets, where our children speaks, the language is just speaking like normal speaking. Because I'm saying, the reason why I'm saying this, is it not maybe a tool that can be used to bring our children, to start it from all the primary schools, to bring our children together in terms of communication and also knowing each other better, also in the same language of sign language. I'm not sure if maybe I was able to express myself, but why can't we also find it or introduce it to the primary schools as a whole? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jale. Deaf South Africa. I think this is the only question or comments that has been made.
Okay, thank you for your question. As you know, and I do understand your question completely, we completely, so sorry, DEFSA aims to have South African Sign Language as a benefit to all schools, hearing and deaf. So linked to that question, for primary school up to high school, I would assume that's for hearing children. But we would love to implement South African Sign Language in all schools. And also would love to have the hearing children interact with the deaf children as well. So it's not only specifically for the deaf school, we would like to implement it in the hearing schools as well. We need to have a teacher that is capable of teaching South African Sign Language. Also children that have autism, some of them that cannot speak, they need to learn how to sign so that they can communicate in general with anybody that they would like to. So this is a language that we want to build, and with everyone, not only the deaf, but also the hearing. But in general, we would love for it to be accepted in all schools and universities. I know some of the deaf schools are going out to public schools to teach them South African Sign Language. Myself, I would love to attend I go to all the universities, and I love to lecture to the hearing students that are there about South African Sign Language. Do not be afraid when you meet a deaf person. This is how you can basically communicate with them in basic sign language. So this is something we would love to do, but not all of them are open to it, but some are. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Deaf South Africa. Thank you very much for taking this opportunity to make a contribution in this particular process of the 18th constitutional amendment. We do value all the organizations that have made contributions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Mlungisi Zwane, is he ready? Mr. Mlungisi Zwane? Committee Secretary? Okay. Is that Mr. Zwane? Mr. Zwane, can you hear us? Committee Secretary, can we give you 5 minutes to sort out this issue? Is that fine? Can we come back at 11:05? how do we proceed from here? Clearly, there is an intention by the presenter to present, but there are serious technical glitches. And we must also bear in mind that if he has made his presentation in writing, it has the same weight as the presentation that would have been made verbally. But what is the view of other members? Honorable Horn?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning from my side to everyone on the platform. Chair, you're quite correct. Of course, we can take into account the written submission. There is, however, also the possibility, if we can get an indication as to what the estimation is, how long tomorrow's program will be. It is only about the legal practice regulations. So there is, of course, from a practical perspective, the possibility to accommodate the presenter tomorrow, but that would be dependent on maybe the Secretariat's advice as to what the estimation is about tomorrow's proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Horn. I think that is helpful. Honorable Levoort-Roegen.
Thank you very much, Chair. It is a pity that the presenter has a technical problem. It's particularly with his Wi-Fi. I'm also a bit disappointed if this, with the CRL, I think it's CRL, that they are not attending, because we would have liked to have heard from them as well. But if we can give them another opportunity when their network is better, that would be, and time permitting, of course, I would agree with that.
Thank you very much, Honorable Levoort-Roegen. I think we are dealing with one issue for now, that is of the last presenter, Mr. Zwane. I think there is general, I don't see any objection to us starting with him in the morning. Maybe instead of starting at 9:30, maybe we can start at 9 to accommodate Mr. Zwane. But I personally, however, have a serious problem with an institution of state that would not respond. In fact, that would not make any attempt to contact us, notwithstanding the fact that they do have resources, other than better resources than ordinary members of our community. They don't make any contact with us, and we still accommodate them in the same manner we would have accommodated Mr. Zwane. Any thoughts on that? I'm referring to CRL. Honorable Levoort-Roegen.
Yes, Chair, I agree.
Can I suggest members are free to express a different view, that for CRL, we will take their written submission as the only submission. We will, however, give it equal weight with all other submissions that have been made, both written and those that have been submitted in a written. And in addition to that, there was a verbal presentation, but we only allow Mr. Zwane to make the presentation tomorrow before we proceed to the other business of the day for tomorrow. Will that be in order?
Yes, Chair. It's Honorable Levoort-Roegen. Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any objections? No objections. So for tomorrow, Committee Secretariat, can you contact Mr. Zwane and inform him that he has a slot between 9 o'clock and 9:20. He will start at 9 until 9:20. Then that will be followed by questions before we start with the business of the day tomorrow. Honorable members, just before we adjourn, I think there are just two issues that I would like to raise with members of the Portfolio Committee. Last week, Honorable Ramolubeng lost her aunt, who has been buried. I would like to take this opportunity to pay our condolences as a committee to her and to the family for their loss. We're not able to communicate that to other members because it's the first time we met after that incident. So, but we would like to extend our condolences to her and to her family. Members, also I would like to get some direction from yourselves. On Friday, we are supposed to have a meeting with the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Public Works. And we know there was a cabinet reshuffling yesterday, and the Minister of Public Works and her deputy have been redeployed to other departments, and there is a new Minister of Public Works and a new Deputy Minister of Public Works. I'm not sure whether we should proceed with the meeting on Friday, or we should allow the new minister to appraise himself with the issues, and then we can have another day, or we can proceed with the meeting on Friday. I'm not sure what value we will get from that particular meeting. The other possibility is that we proceed, we schedule the debate, in fact, the report to the House on our oversight visits, and then at an appropriate time we still have that particular meeting with both Minister of Justice and Minister of Public Works. Can I hear your views and direction, members? Honorable Horn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the one hand, one is tempted to take our cue from the President, who said he's doing the shuffling to make government more efficient, and that he has listened to South Africans who wants action, and then mindful of the fact that this has been a long time coming, this specific interaction, to say, but it must happen, and then maybe, hopefully, we can ensure that the issue of court infrastructure is right at the top of the new minister and the deputy's agenda. But to be more practical, it is of course so that it is to be expected that we will bombard the new minister with information, and specifically information that talks to the frustration on the ground and the weaknesses in the interlinkage between justice and public works, and even to an extent correctional services and public works. And it's to be then expected that, of course, the answer will be, I will have to come back to you, I will have to praise myself of the situation, etc., etc. So in that sense, we can also not fool ourselves by thinking that this will be in any way constructive. The only small possible advantage could be that we could impress early on in the tenure of this new minister the importance of court infrastructure, but then I expect the new minister will also be approached from all angles and all corners because of the complexities around public works, if one has to put it in diplomatic terms. So yes, Chair, I think to be practical, we can reschedule, but then on the very specific condition that it can't be again a situation of months before that meeting materializes. I would want to mandate you as our chair to get a specific new date in the very near future on the basis of when the new minister and the deputy might feel that they would be au fait with all of the issues in their department. Thanks.
Thank you very much. But we proceed with the reports in the House.
I would think we can't postpone that any longer, Chair.
Yes, no, that's true. Thank you very much, Honorable Jale.
Thank you very much, Chair. For me, I think any direction is fine, but I was going to propose that though it will seem very impossible sometimes and also unfair to the new ministers, but it was going to be on my side, and I think it was going to be advantageous also. Maybe
we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
There's
Can you hear me?
Yes, but there's background noise there.
Yeah, I'm not in a good space because I just came straight here to Parliament. So, Chair, I was saying maybe it will be an advantage also. We don't know how she will deal with both of them. If one of them comes, because it's still new and they're still trying to get into terms with the responsibility given to them. But if maybe it's possible for them to come, I was going to say it was also going to help them to understand the complexity that Honorable Mon noted of the issues that we are having as the department in relation to infrastructure and all that, so that when they start planning, coming up with their plans around their work, they will take that into consideration. But somebody can come with a different view. But I was going to say, for them, if I was in the position, I would just come and listen. We know that we'll not get as much as we wanted, more so because the reports are going to say whether they come or they don't, as the chair has indicated. So if maybe we can hear from them, if they can come, just to come and listen, because we are the ones who are going to present to the minister, and the minister responds to us as to his own side of the story, her own side of the story, to say the previous one. So I'm not sure, Chair, but either way, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nivotroham.
Thank you very much, Chair. In a way, I do support Honorable Jele, because she did say, if it is possible that either one, the minister or the deputy minister, can be available on Friday, because I do believe that the staff of the department will remain the same. The staff of the department know the issues of the department, what's been happening, and they can perhaps accompany and explain what's been happening with the department in relation to court infrastructure. And the minister and the deputy minister, one of them could be there to listen to their staff presentations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, I would like just to put this to your attention. We have been told that they're going to be sworn in today. And both the minister and the deputy minister, former deputy minister and former deputy minister of public works, are in new positions. And after today, after they have been sworn in, they're still going to be taken through the induction by the presidency. And then thereafter, we are not even sure that they have appointed the supporting staff in their offices even to take to manage diary. I'm on my side, I'm inclined to agree with Honorable Horn, because the matters that were raised are very serious, and let us not just do a box ticking. It would be important that as Parliament we have meaningful engagements to resolve those issues, and some of those issues were even raised by the Chief Justice in his report in the state of the judiciary. I would plead with members that we just allow him to settle, so that when we meet with him, we meet with a person who would have had time to at least read the report, because I guarantee he would not have read the report between now and Friday. And we might likely have a situation where he will be called by Parliament, and then on the other side, he will be called for what is this thing, orientation and induction by the presidency, that we allow them this space, and then so that when we meet, we have a proper engagement with both the minister and the deputy minister. But we continue asking the programming committee to program the report that will be debated in the House, so that even when we meet with him, we will meet him on the basis of the report that has been adopted by the House.
That's fine, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is there a different view on this matter? Can I take?
Chair, it's fine. Honorable Newt-Wickham, it's fine.
Thank you very much. Then the next question, maybe the committee secretary might assist us. Do we have anything other than the issue of us meeting the minister on Friday?
That was the only one on the agenda, Chair.
Okay. Maybe what we can do next week, either Tuesday or Wednesday, we must also deal with the minutes so that they don't pile up, and we have minutes for the whole month that have not been adopted. It will create problems with also us remembering what we said on this day, on that particular day. Can we agree, members, that on Friday we will not be meeting, and then members are free to do other things on Friday?
That's fine.
Thank you very much. Then for this, I think, was there any person from the department who is leading on this 18th constitutional amendment? Because we will only meet for 30 minutes dealing with the 18th constitutional amendments. We would like to know when they will be ready with the responses.
Chairperson, I've just been informed that they have formulated their responses, but they must go through the internal processes, and they should be able to indicate when they'll be ready before the end of today.
Before the end of today?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we fine with that, members?
It's fine, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, the meeting stands adjourned.